Okay, so welcome to the presentation. My name is Michał, and I'm going to talk about Permit, a framework for unified authorization in Elixir, which is finally in the works now. I'm very glad to actually come back to this topic in this edition of the meetup because I think 3 months ago I outlined the idea for this kind of framework. I explained the reasons we wanted to create one. I explained how the solutions on the market are not good enough for what we want to do. And now I can finally tell you a bit more about how the development is doing. So yeah, the outline of today's talk is that first we are going to do some kind of overview. Then, well, I'm not treating this as a specific plan or running order of the presentation, but we are basically going to show you a backlog of what we want to have in the first version, 0.1, because we have the version number right now is 001. The status so far with regard to what we have in the backlog and what the future holds for the product with regard to ideas that we have. Okay, so as I said, I don't like talking too much about myself, so let's keep it brief. My name is Mike. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Curiosum. And in this library's development, I'm basically the lead maintainer of it. And well, something that might tell you a bit about my motivations and basically the reason we are creating this kind of library is that I'm an ex-Ruby developer, haven't touched Ruby for 3 years now, and I miss can a lot. If you are a Ruby developer, you are surely going to know what I'm talking about. And this is a library that has made a lot of the developers' lives easier. And well, I basically haven't found a single project in the Elixir ecosystem yet that takes authorization to a level in which it's so easy to implement. Yeah, and the team behind the library we are developing is myself as the maintainer, Piotr Lisowski as the developer. He's another member of the Curiosum team who's doing a great job in implementing all the ideas that we have. And we are thinking of possible ways to include the outer world, include the community in the development process. So if someone of you is interested in, well, maybe first shaping the process of what it's, of shaping the development process of the library once it gets to a stage where it's really community driven, then feel free to contact me, and I'm really I'll be really excited to chat with you about that. But for now, it's just the two of us, and I think it's going in the right direction. And I'm gonna show you some details later on. Where you can find the library? Actually, the main change for you guys since the last meetup is that there is now a public repository which you can find in our organization at GitHub. The 001 version is now published to Hex since today. And since it's at Hex, you can find a very, very limited and early documentation at hex.pm/permit. And I can say I thought I spent a lot of time documenting this, and it's still just a very small part of what should comprise what the documentation should be made of. So there is a long way in front of us to make it finished, but we are surely not neglecting the subject. So as a quick recap of what we discussed in the previous meetup, which you can watch using this link. I think it's gonna be probably easier for you to just visit Curiosum at YouTube, but you can just visit the channel to find the meetup number 5 to watch the talk. So we discussed a few authorization paradigms, and we discussed that the attribute-based one is the most general one and the one we want to implement in our library, because it basically means that we can reason about any attributes of a subject of the authorization, namely, in most cases, the user. It allows us to reason about all attributes and include all those attributes in the checks, both on subjects and resources to authorize or objects. And we also discussed that it works very well in applications relying on relational databases, because the attributes on both sides are represented by DB columns. And the other models that we discussed, like DAC or role-based access control, are models that ABAC can be reduced to. So we can implement them using ABAC. So as a conclusion, we chose the model as the one we want to follow in the framework. We discussed that ABAC is in Elixir thanks to pattern matching and well, macros, or not really macros, because you can create all sorts of DSLs using macros, but it doesn't mean that it's gonna be easier to use. So you have to be careful with that. These conceptual examples, and we are specifically talking about the right-hand side of what we see here, because on the left-hand side we have some kind of predicate-based permissions, which we don't want to use for some reasons that we are going to visit later. We want the thing on the right-hand side, so we are going to define permissions as rules stored in keyword lists. And in this case, we, for example, want to implement a user being authorized to access resources at a specific sensitivity level, using an operator of less than or equal here. And we don't want to use a function to define this, as in the left-hand side example, because it's not going to be flexible enough for translating this into Ecto queries. That's what we want to do. That's what none of the libraries so far has done. And that's what I missed from Kankan, for example. So in the previous presentations, we also analyzed many other existing authorization frameworks for Elixir, and I drew the conclusion that permit is going to be better than every single one of them, which doesn't mean that the others haven't done a great job implementing those, but we just want a library that has some traits that none of them currently has, mainly the automatic building of Ecto queries for accessible record scopes. So in the backlog for the 0.1 version, we want to produce is first we did a refactor to an internal proof of concept project, which was needed to clean some stuff up, because this actually evolves from a piece of code in a few applications that we developed, that we then extracted to an internal POC of a framework that we then needed to clean up. Then after the internal POC, we had to make it define conditions for users and not role records. We had a notion of previously we had a notion of every subject record, namely the user, needing to return a structure encapsulating the information about the user's role. And for some reasons related to the ability to construct Ecto queries from that, we needed to replace it with actually defining conditions for users directly. So that's what you can see in this example at the right hand side, in which the permission is defined for a user. Okay, the next thing we did was defining conditions with operators other than equality. So previously the thing you can see on the right hand side with the LTE user level thing was not possible because the first implementation was just like you could have a keyword list of level, for example 5, or attributes, and then a value for that attribute, and it was all matched using an exact match, an equality match. And right now we have a syntax for using, for example, less than not is not null, or like, which was an interesting challenge because we had to well, the idea was to do something that both allows us to check authorization conditions about against a record that we have already loaded, and be able to construct an Ecto query for a scope of accessible records. And for this purpose, we built a kind of translator between the like syntax and the regular expression syntax. So when we build Ecto queries from the authorization conditions, we use the like syntax, obviously. And if we stay in the Elixir world, it's translated to a regular expression. And what we still have to do here is allow the programmer to use extensions to the like syntax, which don't exist in ANSI SQL, but are specific to Postgres or any other DB system like MySQL and this kind of stuff. And now that we have the condition definition syntax, we have also implemented a way to build Ecto queries based on those operator-driven rule definitions. So, for example, if we say that a user with a editor role is allowed to perform all actions on a record with the, for example, unpublished state, then we want to be able, and we are now able, to build an Ecto query which selects all the records based on this condition, selects all the records from the articles table with column values matching the rules that we have in the authorization structure. So that's nice, and that's what we wanted to achieve. And then based on that, we want to be able to plug in Ecto query construction for automatic record preloading. Because what we do right now, so far, is, for example, if we have a show action in something like an article controller, we take the ID from the params and either using plug or using hooks in live view, we load the record with that ID, check if the record is authorized based on the currently existing conditions, and based on the result of the check, we either assign this to the cons assigns or just discard this and handle the error in some way, either redirect somewhere or do whatever else the programmer wants to do. So what we want to do now is to allow doing this in actions such as index, in which we are interested in more than a singular resource, but a scope of resources, right? And what we also need to do is obviously make up the documentation, as I said, settling for a stable syntax in a few places, mainly regarding configuration of the library's usage in a specific app, because the decisions regarding configuration syntax have to be well thought out, because it's going to live in the code base for a very long time. And something that's also in progress is defining rules for arbitrarily named actions, because we had some discussions about what to do with regard to the syntax of this, not to bloat the framework with an abundance of macro generated code. So it's still in the making. Okay, so that's basically the backlog for the 0.1 version. So that's basically everything that we have defined so far as stuff that we want to have in the product. So just to build on that, let me just do a quick and brief live showcase of the code base. So let me switch to the screen share for a second. And okay, so I think you can see my screen right now. And I'm going to basically what I'm going to show you is the repository of the app of the library. And the first thing I'm gonna show you is a fake app that lives in the test folder, because we well, we want to have full test coverage, and obviously we want everything to be tested in conditions that closely simulate real life. So we decided to test it using a fake application that has everything that we want to have, everything that we want to use in the authorization framework. So what we start from is defining an authorization module, which is kind of a configuration for the authorization facilities of the app. And the main thing we use is the permit module, and we specify where the permission definitions live and what the repo is, because some stuff is going to be done automatically using the repo we specify here. So we go to the permissions module, and you can see that we have a plain Elixir syntax to create the permission definitions. And in this case, it's still not been updated with the new user-centric and not role-centric verification, but it's still like a to-do for us. And you can see that, well, if you treat this as actually something like, for example, a user here instead of the role word here, you can say that you are actually going to grant the user all privileges on a resource of the type item, right? Regardless of its attributes. But in this particular case, in the second predicate, you want to grant all privileges on an item to a user with a specifically matched set of attributes using a function. And actually, this syntax is there for some edge cases that you are maybe going to use, but we are not encouraging to use this syntax because it's not going to be possible to build Ecto queries from this, right? Because to build Ecto queries, we need this syntax. So we could also try writing this as a function, but if we define it like this using a plain Elixir keyword list, we can easily translate this to an Ecto query, which is what we want to do, right? So and obviously the all function grants the user access to all actions that you can do on the record, and the read function grants the user access to reading this, which is automatically mapped to, for example, the show action in controllers, also the index action in controllers. And similarly, for example, update maps to edit and update in Phoenix, right? And the question that we are going to resolve shortly right now is what syntax to use if we want to authorize actions which don't map to conventionally named controller actions. So that's what we still have to resolve. So that's the permissions definition module. Then what we can do is go to, well, obviously we have a fake schema here, which kind of resembles an Ecto schema. We have a fake repo, which implements only the get function that the library is using under the hood. We have a fake router, and in the fake router we also have a reference to a controller. This is a different definition of a different definition of a router, which is also used in a different test. Obviously, the session controller is just meant to be for user sign-in. And let's maybe go to one of the item controllers that we have. And right now, this is what the usage of this authorization framework looks like in a controller. So we basically, most of those options are optional. Some of those are mandatory, mainly the authorization module that refers to the main authorization module we have in the app. Resource module, so it knows what rules to look for in this permission definition module. And then we can either use the repo to get specific records from the database based on the ID in the controller params, or specify a loader, which is the use case tested in this controller. So we specify the loader function like this, which allows you to interact with, for example, Phoenix contexts to load stuff. And as you can see, once this is done, in the show action, which is also tested somewhere in the tests, you can you get the loaded resource living in the loaded resource assign inside the con, right? So you get it preloaded automatically. And as I said, what we want to do is do the same for actions such as index, right? Because we don't have it yet. And that's what we need, why we need the Ecto queries for. Apart from this, we have a live router, and to plug it in live view, you need to have this on mount hook here, as well as modify the hooks, as well as modify the live view that you have. So you also use a module here, specify the authorization module and the resource module, as well as the loader function, optionally the handle unauthorized function that allows you to perform an action. And it's important that you can both access the loaded resource and perform authorization in the mounting phase. And if you handle params and the URL changes and the router's live action changes, so you have it here. This is the live action. This goes into the assigns, and we actually read the live action, and that's what we then map into the specific permission definitions here. So, for example, a live action of index checks read here, right? So we have plenty of tests here for both live view, plug, and the general working of the authorization. So you can check this out yourself afterwards. But as you can see, we have plenty of cases. For example, testing the operators that we have here, as well as the construction of Ecto queries. I think it may have been mentioned upstream, but I'm not really sure it's there. But basically, the goal is that every single feature of the library is tested well enough to be production ready from the get-go. From, let's say, from the 0.1 version, because right now it's really a work in progress, I would say. Okay, I guess that's it for the showcase. So as for the ideas for the future, I think beyond the 0.1 version, we want to develop an integration with other frameworks. And what comes to our mind is obviously AppSync, but it needs some careful thinking about how to map this kind of permissions to the GraphQL language. And our Curiosum colleague Krzysztof has recently pointed that it could be good to think about how it can be integrated with Commanded, a secure as library for Elixir, which is getting more and more popular. But again, it's something that's not in the backlog right now because it has to be well defined and thought out. Another idea is to try on top of the library creating some reusable mixins or maybe adapters. I don't know what name to use here, but basically on top of the ABAC paradigm, uh, we want to be able to create RBAC, mandatory access control, DAC, and this kind of stuff. So that's another idea. And also as a third idea that I've come up with, we might like to be able to do a static code analysis, uh, maybe through some Credo rules or something custom inside the permit library that would let us uh, automatically check that there is no way someone can, for example, access a controller action without going through the authorization rules that we have. It's surely possible, but again, it's something that has to be well defined so we can actually do anything to implement this, right? Okay, so that's it for the ideas, and basically that's also it for the presentation. And now on to the Q&A session. I see that there are a few questions that I'm very happy to answer. So let me just open up the first one. Just 1 second, I need to get this right. Okay, so it might not be related to presentation, but Yusuf has asked if we at Curiosum would ever consider working with Flutter. I would say we would. Our focus with the mobile technologies is React Native, to because it's just a decision we made a while back, considering the ease of transition from React to React Native and from React Native to React, and the size of talent pools and some other aspects that were taken into consideration now. But I would say we would consider this if we had an opportunity to do this right, because it's not about us able to do this at all, but to do this the right way. So that's, I think, the answer to give. The big question from Mateus Martins: Bootstrap 5.2 or Tailwind? I have a prejudice against Tailwind. I would say, well, someone has done a nice answer to this with Bootstrap being good for prototypes and Tailwind for at later stages of product. I would say, well, Bootstrap is so Bootstrap has already proven to be good enough for so many production grade projects that it still would be my default choice. But I say this as someone who's not really a front-end developer, and to my liking, Tailwind has at least a few times proven to be too hard to configure and get right from the get-go to consider this something I would use actually. So maybe in my case the answer is Bootstrap, but opinions may vary greatly on this. So yeah, that's my stance. Which database are you using? It's a question from Yusuf. Postgres, MySQL, and so on. So, well, it doesn't come probably as a surprise that I mostly use Postgres because, well, its feature set has evolved to be something that's very comprehensive for most most cases. And in Elixir, in the Elixir ecosystem, we have plenty of libraries that leverage its features for stuff that you could probably not associate this kind of databases with. For example, Oban for scheduled jobs using the Postgres PubSub feature. So that's mostly what we use, but basically it doesn't really matter a lot. In this case, we would probably use whatever works, maybe apart from some very weird NoSQL ideas, because I think using NoSQL databases is only justified if it's really well explained and you know what you're doing. And most of the time, it's just best to stick to relational databases because of the personal has also a lot to do with this because it's just what almost everyone can use and is pretty good at using, I would say. Piotr has asked me, has said that I have nice type annotations for functions in the code editor. I honestly don't have an idea about what type annotations you are referring to. So let me just jump back into the editor. I think you might be referring to something that the editor displays above functions that don't have type specs above them. So I guess it's something that you can achieve with the Elixir LS extension, as well as some usage of Dialyzer. I guess it uses Dialyzer for this under the hood. Yasid has asked me in which case we need to choose REST API and in which case we need to choose GraphQL in Elixir. Okay, I would say, well, from my perspective, every project with GraphQL requires a senior developer to oversee stuff in the project because on paper it looks like a perfect thing to consume and a very straightforward thing to implement, but you always run into issues that make it hard to, because it works right if everyone gets everything right. And once someone makes a mistake somewhere, I find it really hard to track down in many cases. So if the team is not 100% convinced to actually go for GraphQL, I would use for the REST API thing, but adhering to a set of principles such as the JSON API thing, for example, because a REST API that doesn't follow any set of good conventions is just not worth starting from scratch, because if people don't have a set of conventions to follow in a project, they are just going to do whatever they like. And if you tell the people that there is a convention that we want and have to follow in a project with regard to the API, then we are going to be fine, because whoever comes into the project, we are going to tell them that we are following the JSON API convention and that's it, and review everything against that. Okay, which Elixir versions are supported by it? The question from Zair. I think today I set the requirement to 1.12. It might be less than this if we get rid of some convenience from function usage such as kernel then, which we love. It might go down to 1.10 because 1.10 is required by one of the libraries, which I honestly am not sure if it's needed for the main dependencies of the project, which always have to be there, or some of the dependencies marked as optional or development only. So it might go down to 1.10. Below that, I don't know, but this has a pretty low priority right now. But once we get this thing right, we will just relax the requirement, I think. Okay. I guess if there are no further questions that you have in the Q&A session, let me just see if I didn't miss anything in the public channel. Okay, someone's typing, so I'm gonna wait for a moment. So you have the last opportunity to add a question to the Q&A. Yeah, so maybe I'll answer the last one from Yasir. So the question is whether we prefer to I think go for React.js straight from the beginning or stick to doing front-end in plain as a plain Phoenix app with HTML and CSS in the templates. I guess it depends because if your application is going to benefit more from live view usage, because there are specific use cases of live view which are a bit different from what you would have in applications that would just use React and that's all. I think if you can envision your application benefit from the usage of live view, it's better to omit React totally from the equation at the beginning and go for a plain Phoenix app because it's just going to be so easy to convert this to a live view enabled application, at least in some parts of it. Obviously, I would go for React if I had a team which has a lot of React talent already. Because it's not really possible to do anything, meaningful projects without considering the personnel which is going to work on them. So that's a big factor. I think if an application is going to be mobile enabled or work offline, which is kind of two things that go together oftentimes, I would rather go for React, I would say. Okay. Just one moment for more questions. I think if there are no further questions, then thank you very much for being with us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about the library. We would like to invite you to the next Elixir Meetup, which is going to be held on the 14th of September this year. As I said, we already have speakers booked for that, I think. But once again, I encourage you to sign up for the being a speaker or just spread the news about the Elixir Meetup, the next editions. So yeah, thank you for being with us, and I guess you can stay here for one more moment just to have a chat after the meetup. And I personally say goodbye to you right now. So thanks again, and see you next time.